The sound of shattering glass echoed through the modest boarding house as Rose Elliott's brother slammed his fist onto the small wooden table where she kept her earnings. 8 months of working your fingers to the bone at that laundry, and this is all you've got to show for it. Victor Elliott's eyes were bloodshot, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey as he scooped up the small stack of dollar bills she had carefully hidden beneath her spare petticoat. "Victor, please, that's everything I have," Rose pleaded, reaching for the money with trembling hands. At 22, she'd learned that begging only fueled her older brother's temper, but desperation clouded her judgment. "Mrs. Henderson needs the rent by tomorrow, or we'll be out on the street." "You think I don't know that?" Victor growled, stuffing the bills into his vest pocket. "But there's a game tonight at Bullard's Saloon." "Big money, Rose. I can double this, triple it even, then we can pay that old crow and have plenty left over. Like the last time, and the time before that." Rose's voice cracked as she stood her ground, auburn hair falling loose from her once neat bun. "You promised after Ma died that you'd take care of us, not gamble away every cent." The back of Victor's hand struck her cheek before she could step away. The force sent her stumbling against the wall of their rented room. "Don't you dare speak to me that way," he snarled, adjusting his threadbare jacket. "I'm the man of this family, been carrying your worthless hide since you were 14. Rose touched her stinging cheek, fighting back tears as Victor stormed toward the door. This wasn't the brother who had once carried her on his shoulders at county fairs or taught her to fish in the creek behind their family's farm. That boy had disappeared years ago, replaced by a bitter man drowning in gambling debts and whiskey. "I'll be back when I'm back," he muttered, not bothering to look at her again before slamming the door. Rose slid down the wall until she hit the floor, finally allowing silent tears to fall. Silver Creek, Colorado, had promised so much when they'd arrived in 1881, a fresh start after losing both parents and their family farm back east. Instead, the small mining town had only deepened Victor's vices and drained Rose's hopes with each passing season. Tomorrow would mark her second full year in Silver Creek. 2 years of washing other people's linens 6 days a week, her hands perpetually raw from lye soap and scalding water. 2 years of hiding money that Victor inevitably found and lost at card tables or squandered on whiskey. 2 years of promises broken and dreams deferred. She couldn't face another day of it. Not like this. With determination born of desperation, Rose dried her tears and pushed herself to her feet. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house sat on the edge of town, a stone's throw from the livery stable where travelers often left their horses while conducting business in Silver Creek. Perhaps someone there would know of work elsewhere, somewhere beyond Victor's reach. The late afternoon air carried the bite of approaching autumn as Rose hurried toward the livery, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders. She would need to be back before Victor returned, though experience told her that might not be until dawn if he returned at all tonight. As she approached the weathered building, the sound of horses and men's voices reached her ears. A group of cowboys had just arrived, dust still clinging to their clothes and hats as they dismounted. They looked to be trail hands, perhaps delivering cattle to one of the larger ranches that surrounded Silver Creek. Rose hesitated, sudden shyness overtaking her purpose. She'd spent so much time at the laundry or hiding in her room that speaking to strangers, especially men, felt foreign to her. But the memory of Victor pocketing her hard-earned money steeled her resolve. She approached the liveryman, an older fellow named Joseph who had always been kind to her on the few occasions they'd crossed paths. "Excuse me, Mr. Winters," she said softly. "I was wondering if you might know of any work available outside of town." Joseph looked up from the saddle he was examining, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Miss Elliott, isn't it? You work over at Widow Patterson's laundry, if I recall." "Yes, sir." "But I'm looking to make a change," she replied, conscious of the fresh bruise forming on her cheek. She turned her face slightly, hoping the gathering shadows would hide the mark. Joseph frowned, his gaze lingering a moment too long on her face before he spoke again. "Well, can't say I know of much suitable for a young lady such as yourself, but Mr. Winters—" A deep voice called from the stable entrance, interrupting their conversation. "That bay mare of mine is favoring her front left. Mind taking a look before we settle up?" Rose turned to see one of the cowboys striding toward them. He was tall with broad shoulders, his face partially shadowed by his hat brim. What caught her attention most were his eyes, a clear, striking blue that stood out against his sun-bronzed skin. "Of course, Mr. Logan," Joseph replied, setting the saddle aside. "Be right there." The cowboy nodded, then seemed to notice Rose for the first time. He tipped his hat politely. "Madam, this here's Miss Elliott," Joseph said by way of introduction. "She's asking after work opportunities outside Silver Creek." The cowboy Mr. Logan studied her more carefully now. Rose felt herself flush under his scrutiny, especially when his gaze briefly touched on the bruise she was trying to hide. "Ethan Logan," he said finally, extending a hand. "Foreman at the Diamondback Ranch, about 15 miles north of here." Rose took his hand briefly, surprised by the gentleness of his grip despite his calloused palm. "Rose Elliott," she replied. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Logan." "Miss Elliott works over at the laundry," Joseph added, moving toward the stables. "I'll just check on that mare, Mr. Logan. Won't be but a minute." When Joseph disappeared into the stable, an uncomfortable silence fell between Rose and Ethan Logan. She was acutely aware of her worn dress and loose hair, a stark contrast to the controlled competence the rancher exuded despite his trail dust. "What kind of work are you looking for, Miss Elliott?" he asked finally, his voice lower now that they were effectively alone. "Anything honest," she answered with quiet dignity. "I can cook, clean so reasonably well. I'm a hard worker, Mr. Logan." Ethan shifted his weight, considering her words. "Ranch life isn't easy, especially for a woman on her own." "Neither is town life," Rose replied, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. Something in her tone seemed to resonate with him. He studied her face more carefully, and Rose knew he was seeing the bruise now, no matter how she tried to angle away from him. "The Diamondback's owner, Mrs. Holloway, has been looking for help with the household," he said after a moment. "Her arthritis is getting worse, and there's more work than she can manage alone. It's not grand living, mind you, just a ranch house with the bunkhouse nearby for the hands." Hope flickered in Rose's chest. Would she consider someone she's never met? "I've known Julia Holloway for 8 years, Ethan replied. "If I recommend someone, she'll give them a fair chance." Rose bit her lip, considering, "When would you need an answer?" "We're heading back at first light tomorrow." His blue eyes held her steadily. "If you're serious, be here with whatever you can carry. The ranch can provide most necessities." Before Rose could respond, Joseph returned with news about the mare, just a stone that needed removing from her hoof. As Ethan turned his attention to Joseph, Rose slipped away, mind racing with possibilities and fears. That night, as she lay in bed listening for Victor's return, Rose made her decision. She would leave with Ethan Logan and the other ranch hands at dawn. Victor had taken everything from her, their parents' memory, her dignity, and now her wages. She had nothing left to lose. She packed her meager belongings in the darkness: 2 dresses, undergarments, her mother's tarnished silver hairbrush, a faded daguerreotype of her parents, and a small Bible. Everything she owned fit easily into a single carpet bag. Just before dawn, Rose heard Victor stumble into their shared room. She feigned sleep as he crashed onto his bed, reeking of alcohol and tobacco. His pockets would be empty, she knew. Her wages gone, as they always were. It would be the last time, she promised herself. The very last time. When the first hint of light crept through the window, Rose silently gathered her bag and slipped from the room. She left a brief note for Mrs. Henderson, apologizing for leaving without proper notice, promising to send money when she could. She said nothing about Victor. Let him explain her absence however he pleased. The morning air was crisp and clear as Rose hurried toward the livery stable. Her heart pounded with each step, fear and excitement warring within her. She had never done anything so bold in her entire life. Ethan Logan was already there, helping his men prepare the horses for the journey. He spotted her immediately, his expression betraying mild surprise that she had actually come. "Miss Elliott," he said, approaching her. "You've made your decision, then?" Rose nodded firmly. "I have, Mr. Logan, if your offer still stands." Ethan studied her in the growing light, his gaze briefly lingering on the now visible bruise on her cheek. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he nodded. "It does. We'll need to get you a horse. Can you ride?" "Not well," Rose admitted, "but I can learn." A hint of a smile touched his lips. That's the right attitude for ranch life. He turned and called to one of his men. Miller, bring that dun mare around. She's gentle enough for a beginner. As the men finished preparations, Rose stood awkwardly with her carpet bag, fighting the urge to look back toward town. This was her chance, perhaps her only chance to escape the cycle she'd been trapped in with Victor. Just as they were preparing to mount up, a shout from down the street froze Rose's blood. "Rose, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Victor was striding toward them, his face contorted with rage even at this distance. His clothes were rumpled from sleeping in them, his eyes bloodshot from a night of drinking. "Oh God," Rose whispered, instinctively stepping back. Ethan moved slightly in front of her, his posture straightening as he assessed the approaching man. "Friend of yours?" he asked quietly. "My brother," Rose replied, her voice barely audible. Victor reached them, grabbing for Rose's arm. "You think you can just run off? After all I've done for you?" Ethan smoothly intercepted Victor's reach, placing himself firmly between the siblings. "The lady is coming to work at Diamondback Ranch," he said, his voice level but carrying an unmistakable edge. "I suggest you say your goodbyes civilly, Mr. Elliott." Victor's eyes narrowed, darting between Rose and Ethan. "This isn't your business, Cowboy. She's my sister and she's coming home." "No, Victor," Rose said, finding her voice despite her trembling hands. "I'm not. I can't live like this anymore, watching you drink and gamble away everything we earn." Victor's face darkened. "Everything we earn. I've kept a roof over our heads for 8 years, and this is the thanks I get." "A roof you nearly lose every month when you take my wages for your card games," Rose countered, a lifetime of stored resentment finally breaking free. "I worked yesterday from dawn until dusk, and by nightfall you'd taken every cent I earned." Several of Ethan's cowboys had gathered closer now, watching the confrontation with wary eyes. Victor seemed to register that he was outnumbered, but his anger outweighed his caution. "You ungrateful little," he lunged forward again. This time, Ethan's response was swift and decisive. He caught Victor by the collar, spinning him around and pushing him back several steps. "That's enough," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The lady has made her choice." Victor stumbled but kept his footing, his hands balling into fists. "You can't just take my sister, you son of a—" "I'm not taking anyone," Ethan interrupted. "Miss Elliott is accepting a job offer of her own free will." He took a step closer to Victor, his voice dropping so only the three of them could hear. "And from what I can see, she's leaving because her brother took her wages. Let me make something perfectly clear. He won't touch her or her money again." The calm certainty in Ethan's voice sent a shiver down Rose's spine. It wasn't a threat delivered with bluster or rage, it was a simple statement of fact. Victor glared at Ethan, seemingly weighing his options. After a tense moment, he spat on the ground between them. "Fine, take her, she's been nothing but a burden anyway." He turned his venom toward Rose. "Don't come crawling back when you realize what men like him really want from women like you." Rose flinched at his words but held her ground. "Goodbye, Victor." Without another glance, Victor turned and stalked back toward town, shoulders hunched against the morning light. The silence that followed felt oppressive until Ethan turned to Rose. "Are you still certain about this?" he asked quietly. "It's not too late to change your mind." Rose took a deep breath, looking from Ethan to the road that stretched north out of Silver Creek. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Mr. Logan." Ethan nodded once, then helped her mount the dun mare. As they rode out of town, Rose didn't look back. For the first time in years, she was looking forward instead. The journey to Diamondback Ranch took most of the day. They traveled at a steady pace through rolling grasslands and pine-forested hills. Rose's inexperience on horseback soon became evident as muscles she'd never used before protested each mile. Ethan rode alongside her, occasionally offering quiet advice on how to better balance or hold the reins. His manner remained polite but reserved, giving Rose space to process the momentous step she'd taken that morning. The other cowboys, 6 in all, kept a respectful distance, though Rose caught curious glances cast her way throughout the journey. She wondered what they thought of their foreman bringing a bruised laundress back to the ranch. By mid-afternoon, when they stopped briefly to rest the horses by a small creek, Rose's legs were trembling with fatigue. She dismounted clumsily, nearly collapsing when her feet touched the ground. Ethan was suddenly beside her, a steadying hand at her elbow. First long ride is always the hardest, he said, a hint of sympathy softening his usually stoic expression. Rose managed a weak smile. I'll toughen up quickly, Mr. Logan. You won't need to worry about me slowing you down. Ethan shook his head slightly. That wasn't my concern. He released her arm once he was certain she could stand unaided. There's water for washing up just around those bushes if you'd like some privacy. We'll rest here for 20 minutes before continuing. Rose gratefully accepted the opportunity to freshen up, carrying her carpet bag with her behind the screen of bushes Ethan had indicated. The cool water from the creek was blissful against her face, though she winced when her fingers brushed against the bruise on her cheek. As she straightened her hair and dress as best she could, Rose found herself wondering about Ethan Logan. He was clearly respected by his men, yet there was something solitary about him. He carried authority naturally, but without the swagger or cruelty that often accompanied power in men she'd known. When she returned to the group, one of the younger cowboys, hardly more than a boy, really offered her a piece of jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag. Name's Tommy, miss, he said, tipping his hat. Tommy Miller. Foreman said you might be hungry. Rose accepted the simple food with sincere thanks, realizing she'd been too nervous to eat before leaving town. As she ate, the other cowboys introduced themselves one by one, simple, direct men who looked at her with curiosity but not unkindness. Back in the saddle, the afternoon stretched long before them. Rose focused on the horizon rather than her discomfort, determined to show the strength she knew lived within her. When the ranch buildings finally came into view in the golden light of late afternoon, she nearly wept with relief. Diamondback Ranch sprawled across a broad valley, nestled against the protective embrace of pine-covered hills. A two-story ranch house stood as the property's heart, with a large barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings creating a rough semicircle around a central yard. Corrals and fenced pastures extended outward, and cattle could be seen grazing on the lush grass of the valley floor. It wasn't the largest ranch Rose had ever seen, but it had an air of solidity and permanence that spoke of careful stewardship. As they approached, a woman emerged onto the front porch of the main house, shading her eyes against the setting sun. That's Mrs. Holloway, Ethan explained as they rode into the yard. Julia Holloway, she owns Diamondback now since her husband passed 3 winters ago. Mrs. Holloway proved to be a handsome woman in her early 60s, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun, her posture straight despite the arthritis Ethan had mentioned. She watched with interest as the group dismounted in front of the house. Ethan Logan, you're a day early, she called, her voice carrying a note of pleased surprise. And I see you've brought company beyond the usual ruffians. Ethan helped Rose dismount, supporting her when her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. Mrs. Holloway, he said, guiding Rose toward the porch. This is Miss Rose Elliott. She's looking for work, and I recalled you mentioning the need for help around the house. Julia Holloway's sharp eyes took in Rose's appearance, the simple dress, the carpet bag, and most notably, the bruise on her cheek. If she had questions about those things, she kept them to herself. Can you cook, Miss Elliott? She asked instead. Yes, madam, Rose replied. Nothing fancy but good, solid food. Can you read and write? Yes, madam, my mother was insistent on education. Are you afraid of hard work, long days, and occasional chaos? Rose straightened her shoulders despite her exhaustion. No, madam, I've been working in a laundry for 2 years. I'm no stranger to hard work. A smile slowly spread across Julia Holloway's face. Well then, it seems Ethan has found exactly what I need. She descended the porch steps with careful movements that betrayed her arthritic pain. Welcome to Diamondback Ranch, Miss Elliott. We'll discuss specific duties and wages tomorrow after you've had a proper meal and rest. Relief washed over Rose, so powerful that she swayed slightly where she stood. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway, I won't disappoint you. I'm sure you won't, Julia replied, her gaze shifted to Ethan. Get the men settled, then join us for supper. Cook's made enough stew to feed an army as usual. Ethan tipped his hat. Yes, madam. As he turned to lead the horses toward the barn with his men, Rose caught his eye. Thank you, Mr. Logan, she said softly, for everything. Something flickered in his blue eyes, something warm that was quickly veiled. He nodded once before turning away, leaving Rose to follow Mrs. Holloway into what would become her new home. The next few weeks passed in a blur of new routines and responsibilities. Rose quickly proved her worth in the ranch house, taking over much of the cooking and cleaning that had become difficult for Mrs. Holloway. The older woman was a patient teacher, showing Rose the particular ways of running a ranch household different in many respects from town living. A ranch is its own little kingdom, Julia explained as they worked side by side in the kitchen one morning. We must be more self-sufficient here. Town is too far for regular trips, especially in winter. Rose absorbed every lesson eagerly, grateful for Julia's straightforward manner and lack of prying questions about her past. The bruise on her cheek had faded, but the memory of Victor's anger and Ethan's intervention remained fresh in her mind. She saw Ethan daily, though their interactions were limited and formal. As foreman, he took his meals at the main house, discussing ranch business with Mrs. Holloway while Rose served food and quietly cleared dishes. Occasionally their eyes would meet across the table, and Rose would feel an inexplicable warmth rise to her cheeks before she busied herself with some task. There was something about Ethan Logan that intrigued her, a quiet depth beneath his capable exterior. He spoke little but observed much, his opinions carefully considered before being offered. The ranch hands clearly respected him, jumping to attention when he entered the barn or corrals, eager to earn his rare words of praise. One evening, nearly a month after her arrival, Rose was hanging freshly washed linens on the line behind the house when she heard approaching hoofbeats. Shielding her eyes against the late afternoon sun, she recognized Ethan returning from checking the north pastures. He slowed his horse as he approached, and Rose realized he intended to speak with her, something he rarely did without Mrs. Holloway present. "Miss Elliott," he said, dismounting with fluid grace. "How are you settling in?" Rose smoothed her apron, suddenly conscious of her wind-blown hair and work-reddened hands. "Very well, thank you, Mr. Logan. Mrs. Holloway is a wonderful teacher." Ethan nodded, running a hand along his horse's neck as the animal shifted restlessly. "Julia speaks highly of your work. Says you've been a godsend around the house." "That's kind of her to say," Rose replied, pleasure warming her at the unexpected praise. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." A moment of silence stretched between them, neither quite meeting the other's eyes. "Your first month's wages," Ethan said finally, reaching into his vest pocket to withdraw an envelope. "Mrs. Holloway asked me to give this to you." Rose accepted the envelope, her fingers brushing against his briefly. The paper felt substantial in her hand, tangible evidence of her new beginning. "Thank you." Ethan hesitated, seeming on the verge of saying something more. Instead, he simply nodded and turned to lead his horse toward the barn. "Mr. Logan," Rose called after him, a sudden impulse she couldn't quite explain. When he paused and looked back, she continued, "Would you?" "That is, I've baked an apple pie for after supper. Mrs. Holloway says the apples from the orchard are particularly good this year." A smile, one of his rare, genuine smiles that transformed his entire face, curved Ethan's lips. "I never miss Cook's apple pies." "I look forward to trying yours, Miss Elliott." With that, he continued toward the barn, leaving Rose to finish hanging the linens with a strange flutter in her chest. That evening, Rose took extra care with her appearance before serving supper, pinning her auburn hair more carefully than usual and changing into her better dress, a simple blue cotton that Mrs. Holloway had helped her alter to fit properly. She told herself it was merely respect for her position in the household, not because Ethan Logan would be studying her pie with his thoughtful blue eyes. Supper was the usual affair of ranch business discussion, with Julia asking detailed questions about cattle counts and grazing conditions. Rose served efficiently, adding comments only when directly addressed. As she brought out the pie, however, conversation shifted. "Miss Elliott tells me this is her mother's recipe," Mrs. Holloway remarked as Rose placed the golden-crusted pie on the table. "Apparently it was quite famous in their hometown." Ethan looked up at Rose with interest. "Is that so? Where was home before Silver Creek, Miss Elliott?" The question was innocent enough, but Rose felt a moment's hesitation before answering. She had shared very little about her past with either of them. "A small farming community in Pennsylvania," she said finally. "Nothing as grand as this." "Pennsylvania's a long way to come," Ethan observed, accepting the slice of pie Rose placed before him. Our parents died within months of each other, Rose explained, the familiar grief a dull ache now rather than the sharp pain it once had been. Victor, my brother, thought the West offered better opportunities. And did it? Mrs. Holloway asked, her perceptive eyes watching Rose carefully. Rose considered the question as she served herself a small slice and took her seat. It offered different opportunities, she said diplomatically, though I think I've found the best one here at Diamondback. Ethan took a bite of pie, his expression shifting to one of pleasant surprise. This is exceptional, Miss Elliott, he said after swallowing. Your mother taught you well. The simple compliment warmed Rose more than it should have. Thank you, Mr. Logan. She believed cooking was an expression of care for those you. She faltered, suddenly self-conscious. For those in your household, she amended. A comfortable silence fell as they enjoyed the dessert. When Ethan had finished his slice, he looked up at Rose with an expression she couldn't quite read. I'll be riding into Silver Creek tomorrow for supplies, he said. If there's anything particular you need, or if you'd like to send a letter, I'd be happy to see to it. The mention of Silver Creek sent a chill through Rose. That's very kind, Mr. Logan, but I don't require anything at present. The thought of Ethan potentially encountering Victor made her distinctly uneasy, though she couldn't articulate why. Mrs. Holloway seemed to sense her discomfort. Actually, Ethan, if you wouldn't mind, we could use more coffee and sugar. The winter inventory showed we're running lower than I'd like. Ethan nodded, turning his attention back to his employer. Of course, I'll add it to the list. The moment passed, but later, as Rose cleared the dishes, she found herself wondering if Ethan would indeed cross paths with Victor in town. The thought disturbed her sleep that night, dreams filled with confrontations she couldn't hear but could feel like thunder in her bones. Ethan returned from Silver Creek 2 days later, the wagon loaded with supplies for the coming winter months. Rose watched from the kitchen window as he directed the unloading, his tall figure moving with purpose among the ranch hands. She had been on edge during his absence, jumping at small noises and glancing too often down the road that led to the ranch. When he entered the kitchen with 2 large sacks of coffee beans and sugar, Rose couldn't stop herself from asking, "How was town, Mr. Logan?" Ethan set the supplies on the work table, studying her face for a moment before answering. "Busy, winter's coming and everyone's preparing." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "I saw your brother." Rose's hand stilled where she had been kneading bread dough. "Oh." "He asked about you," Ethan continued, his tone carefully neutral. "Wanted to know if you were still at Diamondback." Fear flickered in Rose's chest. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that you're employed here and doing well." Ethan leaned slightly against the table, his gaze steady on Rose's face. He didn't seem pleased, but he was sober, at least. Rose nodded, resuming her kneading with more force than necessary. "Thank you for telling me." Ethan seemed about to say something more when Mrs. Holloway entered the kitchen, effectively ending their private conversation. But later, as Rose was gathering eggs from the henhouse, she found Ethan waiting for her outside. "Miss Elliott," he said, taking the basket of eggs so she could close the henhouse door. "There's something I didn't mention in front of Mrs. Holloway." Rose's heart skipped uncomfortably. "Yes, your brother asked if you'd received your wages yet." Ethan's expression darkened slightly. He seemed particularly interested in that detail. A cold understanding washed over Rose. "He's hoping I'll send money back to him," she said quietly. "Or that I'll return once winter makes ranch work harder." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. "That was my read of the situation as well." "I won't," Rose said firmly, lifting her chin. "I won't send him money to drink away, and I won't go back." "No one here would expect you to," Ethan assured her, handing back the egg basket. His fingers brushed hers in the exchange, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Your wages are yours, Miss Elliott. You've earned them fairly." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Rose. "Thank you, Mr. Logan." She hesitated, then added softly, "Not just for that, but for believing I could do this start again somewhere new." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, something warm and unguarded. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Miss Elliott. Some of us just need a little help finding it." Before Rose could respond to this unexpectedly personal statement, one of the ranch hands called for Ethan from the direction of the barn. The moment broken, Ethan tipped his hat and strode away, leaving Rose to wonder about the hint of personal experience that had colored his words. The weeks slipped by, turning the trees to gold and crimson as autumn deepened across the valley. Ranch life took on a different rhythm as winter approached. Cattle were moved to lower pastures, the last of the hay was stored in the barn, and additional firewood was split and stacked against the coming cold. Rose found herself settling into the routine with surprising ease. Her body grew stronger from the physical work, her mind more peaceful in the absence of constant worry about Victor's moods and demands. Each night, she slept soundly in the small but comfortable bedroom Mrs. Holloway had given her at the back of the house, no longer startling awake at every creaking floorboard. Her relationship with Ethan remained cordial but distant, each seemingly aware of an invisible boundary between them. Yet Rose found herself noticing small things: the way sunlight caught in his dark hair when he removed his hat, the rare sound of his laughter when one of the younger hands told a particularly good story at supper, the gentleness of his hands when he helped Mrs. Holloway navigate the icy porch steps after the first frost. The first significant snowfall came in early December, blanketing the ranch in pristine white that glittered like diamonds in the morning sun. Rose stood at the kitchen window, marveling at the transformed landscape when Mrs. Holloway joined her. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the older woman remarked, sipping from her coffee cup. "First snow at Diamondback always feels like a blessing." "It's lovely," Rose agreed, "though I imagine it makes the work harder for the men." Mrs. Holloway nodded, her eyes following a figure Rose recognized as Ethan, already making his way through the drifts toward the barn. "Ranching is never easy, but winter brings its own particular challenges." She glanced sidelong at Rose. "Speaking of challenges, the Christmas dance at Pine Creek is in 2 weeks. I'd like you to accompany me." Rose turned in surprise. "A dance?" It's tradition. Ranchers and townsfolk from 3 counties gather at Pine Creek's town hall. "Good food, music, company." Mrs. Holloway smiled at Rose's expression. "Don't look so alarmed, my dear. You've earned some enjoyment after months of hard work." "I haven't attended a dance in years," Rose admitted, feeling suddenly self-conscious, "and I don't have anything appropriate to wear." "As for that, Mrs. Holloway said, setting down her coffee cup, "I believe I have something that might suit you. My daughter left several dresses when she married and moved to Denver. With some minor alterations, I think her green silk would be perfect for you." Rose opened her mouth to protest, but was silenced by Mrs. Holloway's raised hand. "Consider it a Christmas gift, Rose. You've brought light back into this house more than you know." The older woman's eyes softened with genuine affection. "Besides, I think it's time you were seen as more than just the ranch help, don't you?" Before Rose could respond, the back door opened, bringing a swirl of cold air and snow along with Ethan, his shoulders dusted white, cheeks reddened from the cold. "Ladies," he greeted them, stomping snow from his boots. "Beautiful morning, though there's more snow coming by afternoon if the clouds to the north are any indication." "Just in time for Christmas," Mrs. Holloway remarked. "I was just telling Rose about the Pine Creek dance." Something flickered across Ethan's face: surprise, perhaps, or another emotion Rose couldn't identify. "It's always a fine event," he said after a moment. "I'm insisting Rose attend with me," Mrs. Holloway continued, a particular gleam in her eye that made Rose suspect some hidden purpose. "You'll be escorting us, of course, Ethan. I'm far too old to drive the sleigh in such weather." Ethan's eyes met Rose's briefly before he nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Holloway, it would be my pleasure." The days leading up to the dance passed in a flurry of preparations. True to her word, Mrs. Holloway produced a beautiful emerald green silk dress that, with careful alterations, fit Rose as if made for her. The style was a few years old but elegant in its simplicity: a modest neckline, fitted bodice, and gracefully draped skirt that rustled pleasantly when Rose moved. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Holloway declared on the afternoon of the dance, as Rose emerged from her room in the finished dress. "Quite transformed, my dear." Rose blushed at the praise, touching her carefully arranged hair self-consciously. Mrs. Holloway had insisted on pinning it up in a more sophisticated style, with soft curls framing her face. It was the most effort Rose had put into her appearance since before her parents died. "I hardly recognize myself," she admitted, smoothing the unfamiliar silk. It's been so long since I've worn anything but work dresses. All women should have occasions to remember they're more than the work they do, Mrs. Holloway said firmly. Now let's not keep Ethan waiting. The sleigh is ready. Rose followed Mrs. Holloway to the front of the house, where Ethan waited with the sleigh. He stood beside the horses, adjusting their harnesses, his back to the house. When he turned at the sound of the door opening, the expression that crossed his face made Rose's heart skip. Ethan had clearly made an effort with his own appearance. Gone were the work clothes and dusty hat, replaced by a well-cut dark suit, crisp white shirt, and polished boots. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He looked, Rose thought, like someone from another world, entirely a world where ranch foremen transformed into gentlemen for winter dances. "Ladies," he said, recovering his composure, "the sleigh is ready when you are." He helped Mrs. Holloway into the sleigh first, then turned to offer his hand to Rose. When their gloved hands met, Rose felt an unmistakable current pass between them, something electric and unexpected that made her breath catch. "You look lovely, Miss Elliott," Ethan said quietly, his blue eyes holding hers for a brief, intense moment before he released her hand and moved to take his place at the reins. The journey to Pine Creek took nearly an hour through the snow-covered landscape. Mrs. Holloway kept the conversation flowing with stories of past Christmas dances and the people they might encounter at this one. Rose half listened, acutely aware of Ethan's broad shoulders in front of her, the confident way he handled the horses, the occasional glances he cast back to ensure his passengers were comfortable. Pine Creek proved to be larger than Rose had imagined, a proper town with a main street lined with shops, a church steeple rising above the rooftops, and a substantial town hall from which warm light and music spilled into the winter evening. Sleighs and wagons were already gathered outside, people in their finest clothes hurrying through the snow toward the celebration within. The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with evergreen boughs and red ribbons adorning the walls, oil lamps casting a golden glow over the assembled crowd. A small orchestra played at one end of the room, while tables laden with food and drink lined the opposite wall. Rose felt momentarily overwhelmed by the noise and activity after months of quiet ranch life. Mrs. Holloway seemed to sense her discomfort, taking her arm as they moved through the crowd, making introductions to neighbors and friends with practiced ease. "You're Julia's new helper," one woman exclaimed, studying Rose with undisguised curiosity. "We've heard such good things. She says you've revolutionized her household." Rose blushed at the exaggeration. "Mrs. Holloway is too kind. I simply do my best to be useful." "She does far more than that." Ethan's voice came from behind Rose, surprising her. "Miss Elliott has become indispensable at Diamondback." The woman raised her eyebrows slightly, glancing between Rose and Ethan with new interest. "Is that so?" "Well, good help is certainly hard to find in these parts." As the evening progressed, Rose found herself gradually relaxing into the festive atmosphere. The music was lively, the food delicious, and the company generally welcoming, if curious about the young woman from Diamondback Ranch. Mrs. Holloway was clearly respected in the community, which seemed to extend a certain status to Rose by association. She was returning from getting punch for Mrs. Holloway when Ethan appeared at her elbow. "Are you enjoying yourself, Miss Elliott?" he asked, taking one of the cups from her to help. "Very much," Rose replied truthfully. "It's been years since I attended anything like this. I'd almost forgotten what it feels like." Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the crowded room. "Pine Creek does Christmas better than most places I've seen, though I admit dancing isn't my particular talent." Rose smiled at the admission. "Nor mine, I'm afraid. Victor and I never had much opportunity to learn properly." At the mention of her brother, something shifted in Ethan's expression. "Have you heard from him since coming to Diamondback?" Rose shook her head. "No, and I haven't written either. I thought it better to make a clean break." "Probably wise," Ethan agreed. He hesitated, then added more quietly, "I hope you know that you're safe at Diamondback, Miss Elliott. No one there would allow any harm to come to you, least of all me." The simple declaration warmed Rose from within, more potent than any punch or winter fire. "I do know that, Mr. Logan. It's why I felt able to truly start again." Their eyes met and held, the noise and crowd around them momentarily fading into the background. Something unspoken but powerful passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing, carefully contained, over the months since Rose's arrival at the ranch. The moment was broken by a change in the music, the orchestra shifting to a slower, more melodic tune. Couples moved onto the dance floor, assuming positions for a waltz. "Miss Elliott," Ethan said, setting down the punch cup he'd been holding, "would you do me the honor of this dance?" Rose hesitated, glancing toward Mrs. Holloway, who was deep in conversation with several other matrons. "I wouldn't want to leave Mrs. Holloway alone. I believe she's well occupied at present," Ethan replied, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "And I suspect she would insist you accept were she part of this conversation." With a small smile, Rose placed her hand in Ethan's outstretched one. "Then I would be delighted, Mr. Logan." Ethan led her onto the dance floor, placing his hand respectfully at her waist as she rested hers on his shoulder. Despite his earlier disclaimer about his dancing abilities, he moved with confidence and grace, guiding Rose smoothly through the steps of the waltz. "You dance very well for someone who claims no particular talent," Rose observed, relaxing into the rhythm of the music. A smile touched Ethan's lips. "Perhaps I simply needed the right partner." The simple compliment sent a flush of pleasure to Rose's cheeks. As they continued to dance, she became increasingly aware of the strength in Ethan's hand at her waist, the warmth of his body so close to hers, the faint scent of soap and pine that clung to him. It was intoxicating in a way Rose had never experienced before. "May I ask you something, Mr. Logan?" she said after a moment, her voice lower than before. "Of course. That day in Silver Creek, when you confronted Victor, why did you help me? You didn't know me at all." Ethan's steps faltered slightly before he recovered the rhythm. His blue eyes, when they met hers, held a depth of emotion Rose hadn't seen before. "I recognized something in you," he said finally, "a determination to change your circumstances despite the fear. It resonated with me." "You've had to start again too," Rose guessed, reading between his carefully chosen words. Ethan nodded, guiding her through a gentle turn. "My father was much like your brother, a man ruled by drink and gambling debts. He made my mother's life a misery until the day he left us with nothing but his unpaid accounts." His jaw tightened at the memory. "I was 16 when I swore I'd never let anyone suffer that way if I could prevent it." The personal revelation touched Rose deeply. "So when you saw Victor take my wages?" "I saw my father taking my mother's last dollars to pay off the saloon owner," Ethan finished, history repeating itself unless someone interrupted the pattern. Rose's heart ached for the boy he had been and the man he had become because of that experience. "Thank you for interrupting my pattern, Mr. Logan." The music was drawing to a close, but neither seemed eager to part. As the final notes faded, they remained for a moment in their dance position, something unspoken but powerful flowing between them. "Rose," Ethan said softly, using her given name for the first time. Ethan Logan, I thought that was you." A booming voice interrupted whatever Ethan had been about to say. They stepped apart as a large man in an expensive suit approached, hand extended toward Ethan. "Haven't seen you since last year's cattle auction. How's Diamondback faring this season?" Ethan shook the man's hand, his expression smoothly shifting to polite business interest, though Rose noted a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there moments before. "Mr. Baldwin, Diamondback is doing well, thank you. And who might this lovely lady be?" Baldwin asked, turning his attention to Rose with an appraising look that made her distinctly uncomfortable. "Miss Rose Elliott," Ethan replied, his tone cooling slightly. "Miss Elliott works with Mrs. Holloway at the ranch." Baldwin's eyes widened slightly. "Elliott, not Victor Elliott's sister." Rose stiffened, her pleasant evening suddenly tainted by the unexpected connection to her brother. "Yes," she admitted reluctantly. "Though we're not in regular contact." Baldwin laughed, a harsh sound that drew attention from nearby dancers. "I should think not. The man owes half the merchants in Silver Creek money. Rumor has it he's been claiming his sister is working at some fancy ranch and will pay his debts when she gets her wages." Rose felt the blood drain from her face. Ethan moved slightly closer to her, a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed by Baldwin. "Ah, I see," the man said, his gaze moving speculatively between them. Well, that explains why he was so interested in Diamondback's business when I encountered him in Silver Creek last week. What do you mean? Ethan asked sharply. Baldwin shrugged, clearly enjoying being the bearer of significant news. He was asking particular questions about the ranch, how to get there, who worked there, that sort of thing. Seemed especially interested in when the next cattle sale might be happening. Rose felt ill. "Excuse me," she murmured, turning away from the men and moving quickly toward the edge of the room. She needed air, needed to think clearly about what Baldwin's news might mean. She had just reached a quieter corner near one of the windows when Ethan caught up with her. "Rose," he said gently, concern evident in his voice. "Are you all right? He's going to come to Diamondback," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Victor, he thinks I have money now enough to pay his debts." Ethan's expression hardened. "Let him come. He won't get past the front gate if I have anything to say about it." "You don't understand," Rose said, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warmth of the room. "Victor can be persistent when he wants something, and now he's telling people I'll pay his debts. He's using my name, my reputation." "Look at me," Ethan said, waiting until Rose raised her eyes to his. "Nothing will happen to you at Diamondback, not while I'm there. And as for your reputation, anyone who matters knows the kind of person you truly are." The certainty in his voice steadied her. Rose took a deep breath, forcing herself to release some of the tension that had seized her at Baldwin's revelation. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I've spent so many years being afraid of Victor's moods and demands. It's hard to break the habit, even now." Understanding softened Ethan's gaze. "You have nothing to apologize for, but perhaps we should find Mrs. Holloway and head back to the ranch earlier than planned. I'd feel better knowing you're safely home." Rose nodded, grateful for his concern and practical suggestion. As they turned to search for Mrs. Holloway, Ethan surprised her by offering his arm, a public gesture that would be noted by the observant crowd. Without hesitation, Rose placed her hand on his arm, drawing strength from his steady presence beside her. The return journey to Diamondback was considerably quieter than their trip to Pine Creek had been. Mrs. Holloway, perhaps sensing the changed mood, asked few questions about their early departure, instead commenting on the beauty of the night sky and the promise of clear weather for Christmas. Back at the ranch, Ethan helped both women from the sleigh, his hand lingering on Rose's a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Try not to worry," he said quietly as Mrs. Holloway moved toward the house. "I'll speak with the hands tomorrow. No strangers will approach the house without us knowing." Rose nodded, grateful for his foresight. "Thank you, Ethan," he smiled at her use of his given name. "Get some rest, Rose. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." That night, as Rose removed the beautiful green silk dress and carefully hung it in her wardrobe, she found herself dwelling not on the fear Baldwin's news had inspired, but on the memory of dancing in Ethan's arms, the way his eyes had softened when he looked at her, the promise in his words. "We'll face it together." For the first time in years, Rose felt not just safe, but truly seen and valued. The feeling followed her into sleep, tempering her worries about what Victor might do with the warm certainty that she was no longer facing such threats alone. The days following the Pine Creek dance passed with deceptive quietude. Snow continued to blanket the ranch, creating a peaceful landscape that belied Rose's inner tension. She found herself glancing more frequently toward the road that led to Diamondback, jumping slightly at unexpected sounds. Ethan, true to his word, had spoken with the ranch hands. Rose noticed their increased vigilance, men casually positioned near the house throughout the day, regular patrols of the property boundaries, a shotgun placed discreetly but accessibly near the kitchen door. The precautions were both reassuring and unsettling, a constant reminder of the threat Victor potentially posed. Christmas approached with surprising swiftness, bringing with it traditions Rose had almost forgotten during her years with Victor. Mrs. Holloway insisted on decorating the ranch house with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, setting out candles in each window, and planning a feast for the ranch hands who would remain over the holiday. "Christmas at Diamondback has always been special," she explained to Rose as they prepared cookie dough in the kitchen. "My husband believed that men far from their families deserved a proper celebration. I've maintained the tradition since his passing." Rose found herself swept up in the preparations, the festive atmosphere gradually easing some of her anxiety about Victor. On Christmas Eve, as she helped arrange small gifts for each ranch hand, practical items like new gloves or pocket knives, wrapped simply in brown paper, and twine, she realized she felt genuinely happy despite her lingering concerns. The ranch hands gathered in the main house that evening, the normally quiet rooms filled with male voices and laughter as Mrs. Holloway served her traditional Christmas Eve punch. Rose moved among them, offering cookies and joining in conversations, increasingly comfortable with these men who had become something like an extended family over the past months. Ethan watched her from across the room, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When their eyes met over the heads of the celebrating cowboys, Rose felt that now familiar warmth spread through her chest. Whatever was growing between them remained largely unspoken, but it had become a steady presence in her life, as real and sustaining as the bread she baked each morning. Later, as the celebration wound down and the hands returned to the bunkhouse through the softly falling snow, Ethan lingered behind. Rose found him standing on the front porch, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. "It's beautiful," she said, joining him with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the cold. "Like something from a storybook." Ethan nodded, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Diamondback is never more beautiful than on Christmas Eve," he agreed. "Though this year seems particularly special." Rose glanced at him, catching the intent look in his eyes. "Because of the snow, because of you," he said simply. The directness of his statement caught Rose off guard. She felt her cheeks warm despite the cold, her heart suddenly racing. "You've changed this place, Rose," Ethan continued, turning fully toward her now. "Not just the house or Mrs. Holloway's comfort, you've changed everything." Rose swallowed, emotions welling up that she'd been carefully containing for months. "Diamondback changed everything for me first," she said softly. "It gave me safety, purpose, a home." "Is that all it gave you?" Ethan asked, his voice dropping lower as he took a step closer. Rose looked up into his face, reading the question there, the hope and uncertainty that mirrored her own. "No," she whispered. "It gave me you." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, relief, joy, resolution, all passing across his features in quick succession. Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, he raised his hand to her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle against her skin. "Rose Elliott," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been falling in love with you since the day you stood up to your brother in Silver Creek. Every day since has only deepened those feelings." Rose's breath caught at the declaration. "Ethan," she began, but he shook his head slightly. "You don't need to say anything now," he assured her. "I know your life has been complicated, that trust doesn't come easily after what you've experienced. I'm willing to wait. I love you too," Rose interrupted, the words spilling out before she could reconsider them. Once spoken, she knew their absolute truth. "I think I've been falling in love with you since you said Victor wouldn't touch me or my money again. You made me believe I deserved better." Joy transformed Ethan's face, making him look younger, almost boyish in the moonlight. "You deserve everything good in this world, Rose." With exquisite tenderness, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss as gentle as new snow, yet warming her to her core. Rose responded hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, her hands coming to rest against his chest as his arms encircled her waist. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, Rose," he murmured. "Merry Christmas, Ethan," she replied, happiness bubbling through her like champagne. The sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the moment, a horse being ridden hard through the snow, heading directly for the ranch house. Ethan tensed, pushing Rose slightly behind him as he turned toward the sound. "Get inside," he said, his voice shifting instantly from tender to commanding. "Now, Rose, who could be riding here on Christmas Eve?" she asked, even as she moved toward the door, dread pooling in her stomach. Before Ethan could answer, the rider came into view, a lone figure on an exhausted-looking horse, weaving slightly in the saddle as he approached. Even at a distance, even through the falling snow, Rose recognized her brother. "It's Victor," she whispered, frozen in place despite Ethan's directive to go inside. Victor reined in his horse roughly, causing the animal to rear slightly before settling. He was clearly drunk, swaying in the saddle as he squinted toward the porch. Well, well, he called, his words slurring. If it isn't my dear sister and her cowboy protector. Merry Christmas to me, Ethan stepped forward, placing himself firmly between Rose and Victor. You're not welcome here, Elliott. Turn around and ride back to wherever you came from. Victor laughed, the sound harsh in the peaceful night. Not very hospitable, are you? And here I've come all this way to see my only family on Christmas. His gaze shifted to Rose. You're looking well, sister. Clearly ranch life agrees with you. What do you want, Victor? Rose asked, moving to stand beside Ethan despite his attempt to keep her behind him. What does any man want at Christmas? Family, good cheer, Victor replied with a mockery of sentimentality. His tone hardened as he continued, and the money you owe me. She doesn't owe you anything, Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. Victor dismounted clumsily, almost falling before catching himself on the saddle. That's where you're wrong, cowboy. She owes me for 8 years of keeping her fed and housed after our parents died. She owes me for the opportunities she's cost me with her demands and complaints. The only thing I owed you was loyalty, Rose replied, finding strength in Ethan's presence beside her, and I gave that far longer than you deserved it. Victor's face contorted with anger. He took a stumbling step forward, one hand moving to his coat pocket. You ungrateful little, the metallic click of a rifle being cocked interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Tommy Miller stepped from the shadows beside the house, rifle raised and steady in his young hands. That's far enough, mister, Tommy said, his usual easygoing manner replaced by steely resolve. Victor froze, bleary eyes trying to focus on this new threat. As he did, 2 more ranch hands emerged from different directions, each armed and focused intently on the unwelcome visitor. As you can see, Ethan said calmly, Rose has a family now, one that protects its own. Whatever you came here hoping to get, you won't find it. Victor's hand remained near his pocket, his expression shifting rapidly between rage and calculation. She's my sister, he insisted, though with less conviction than before. No, Rose said, her voice stronger than she had ever used with Victor. Not anymore. You lost the right to call me family when you took my wages, when you chose drink and gambling over your promises to our parents. For a moment, it seemed Victor might challenge her declaration. His hand twitched toward his pocket again, but Tommy stepped closer, the rifle unwavering. Finally, with a curse, Victor raised his hand slightly. You've changed, he said to Rose, something like confusion mixing with the anger in his voice. Used to be you knew your place. My place is here now, Rose replied steadily. With people who value me, go home, Victor, there's nothing for you at Diamondback. The lady has spoken, Ethan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. One of my men will escort you to the property line. If you return, you won't receive such a cordial welcome. Victor looked from Rose to Ethan, to the armed ranch hands surrounding him. Whatever fight had driven him to ride to Diamondback on Christmas Eve seemed to drain away, leaving only a bitter, diminished man swaying in the snow. Keep her then, he muttered, turning back to his horse with clumsy movements. She was always more trouble than she was worth anyway. Rose flinched at the familiar cruelty, but Ethan's hand found hers, squeezing gently in silent support. They watched as Victor struggled back into the saddle, nearly falling twice before managing to seat himself. Miller, Gonzalez, see Mr. Elliott safely off Diamondback property, Ethan instructed. Patterson, inform Mrs. Holloway that our unexpected visitor is departing. The men moved to follow his directions with efficient precision. As Victor was led away, he turned once to look back at Rose. For a brief moment, she thought she saw something like regret in his expression, quickly masked by a sneer before he turned away. When Victor and his escorts had disappeared into the darkness, Rose released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. He came all this way, she said softly. On Christmas Eve. Some men can't accept that their power over others has ended, Ethan replied, turning to face her fully. Are you all right? Rose considered the question carefully, taking stock of her emotions. The fear that had gripped her at Victor's appearance was fading, replaced by a surprising sense of resolution. Yes, she said, realizing the truth of it as she spoke. I am. You were magnificent, Ethan told her, admiration clear in his voice, standing your ground, claiming your place here. Rose smiled up at him, a weight she'd carried for years finally lifting from her shoulders. It's easier to be brave when you're not alone. Ethan's arms encircled her again, drawing her close against the cold. "You'll never be alone again, Rose, not as long as I have breath in my body." The promise warmed her more thoroughly than any fire could have. Standing in the gently falling snow, surrounded by the beauty of Diamondback Ranch on Christmas Eve, Rose finally understood what true freedom felt like, the freedom to love and be loved without fear. "Shall we go in?" Ethan suggested after a moment. "Mrs. Holloway will be worried, and it's getting colder." Rose nodded, but before they could move toward the door, she reached up to touch his face. "Ethan," she said softly, "thank you for showing me what a good man truly is." Instead of answering with words, Ethan lowered his lips to hers once more, a kiss that spoke of protection, devotion, and a future bright with promise. As snowflakes settled gently on their shoulders, Rose knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just safety at Diamondback Ranch, but the home and love she had always yearned for. Spring arrived at Diamondback Ranch in a riot of wildflowers and new calves, the harsh winter giving way to renewal across the valley. For Rose, the changing season mirrored the transformation in her own life, dormant hopes blossoming into joyful reality with each passing day. Following Victor's Christmas Eve appearance and unceremonious departure, Rose had expected to feel lingering fear or anxiety. Instead, she found herself increasingly liberated from the shadows of her past. Victor had not returned or made any further attempt to contact her. According to reports from ranch hands who occasionally visited Silver Creek, he had left town entirely some weeks after Christmas, reportedly heading farther west in search of better prospects. Rose's relationship with Ethan had deepened steadily throughout the winter months. What began with Christmas Eve kisses evolved into a courtship conducted with respectful restraint but undeniable passion. Ethan rode with Rose when she ventured beyond the immediate ranch grounds, taught her to handle a gentle mare of her own, and spent evenings by the fire discussing books, dreams, and plans for Diamondback's future. Mrs. Holloway observed their growing attachment with obvious approval, often finding reasons to retire early, leaving the young couple to their conversations. One evening in late March, as the first hints of spring softened the air, Julia had fixed Rose with a particularly knowing look before announcing her intention to visit her daughter in Denver for several weeks. "The ranch will be in capable hands with you two," she had said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Perhaps by the time I return there will be decisions to celebrate." Rose had blushed furiously at the implication, while Ethan had cleared his throat and promised to care for everything in her absence. Now, on a perfect April afternoon, Rose stood in the kitchen garden, considering the neat rows of seedlings she had planted the previous week. The sun warmed her back as she knelt to pull a few persistent weeds, her mind pleasantly occupied with plans for the summer harvest. So absorbed was she in her task that she didn't hear Ethan approach until his shadow fell across her work. Looking up, she was surprised to find him dressed in his best clothes, the suit he had worn to the Christmas dance, a crisp white shirt and polished boots. "Ethan," she questioned, rising and brushing soil from her hands, "I didn't know you were riding into town today." He smiled, a hint of nervousness visible beneath his usual confidence. "I'm not," he replied. "At least not unless you agree to accompany me." Rose glanced down at her work dress, confusion evident on her face. "I'm hardly dressed for town." "You have time to change," Ethan assured her. "I've asked Cook to prepare a special supper for us, but I thought we might ride to the overlook first. The view of the valley is particularly beautiful this time of year." There was something in his manner, an intensity beneath the casual suggestion that sent Rose's heart racing. "Give me 15 minutes," she said, already moving toward the house. True to her word, Rose emerged a quarter-hour later wearing her second-best dress, a pale blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. She had hastily pinned her hair into a neater arrangement and dabbed rosewater at her wrists and throat, a small luxury Mrs. Holloway had insisted on giving her for Christmas. Ethan waited by the corral, holding the reins of both their horses. His smile when he caught sight of her made Rose's breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, pleasure warming her cheeks. "Though I'm still not entirely sure what the occasion is." Ethan helped her mount before swinging into his own saddle. "Does there need to be an occasion to appreciate this perfect spring day with the woman I love?" Put that way, Rose could hardly argue. They rode at a leisurely pace through budding meadows where new calves frolicked on still uncertain legs. Diamondback was thriving. The harsh winter had given way to abundant spring grass, and the calf count was the highest in years. The overlook Ethan had mentioned was a rocky outcropping on the eastern edge of Diamondback property. From its height, one could see the entire valley spread out below the ranch buildings nestled at its heart, pastures unfurling like a green carpet, and the silver thread of Creek winding through it all. They dismounted and secured their horses to a nearby tree before Ethan led Rose to the edge of the overlook. The view was indeed spectacular, with the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the valley and turning the creek water to molten gold. "I've never brought anyone else here," Ethan said quietly, standing close beside her. "This has always been my private thinking place, somewhere to come when decisions need making or troubles need sorting." Rose turned to look at him, touched by the admission. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Ethan took both her hands in his expression growing serious. "Rose, when you first came to Diamondback, you were looking for safety, a place beyond your brother's reach. I hope we've given you that and more over these past months." "You have," Rose assured him, her heart beginning to race at his tone. "Diamondback has become everything to me." "Not Diamondback," Ethan corrected gently. "Home, that's what this place is meant to be, not just a ranch or a job, but a true home." Rose nodded, emotion making it difficult to speak. "I brought you here today," Ethan continued, "because I want to ask if you'll make Diamondback your permanent home, not as Mrs. Holloway's helper or as a woman under my protection, but as my wife." Though she had begun to suspect the purpose of this special outing, the actual words still sent a wave of joy through Rose so powerful that tears sprang to her eyes. Ethan released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small gold ring set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained, his voice roughening slightly. "She told me to save it for the woman who made me believe in goodness again." "Ethan," Rose whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I love you, Rose Elliott," he said, holding the ring between them. "I love your strength, your kindness, your determination to build something beautiful from difficult beginnings. I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." "Yes," Rose answered without hesitation, her tears now falling freely. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Logan." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. With slightly trembling hands, he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as though it had been made for her all along. When he gathered her into his arms, Rose felt as though she might actually be dreaming the perfect view, the perfect man, the perfect moment. Ethan's kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. "No one will ever hurt you again," he murmured against her hair when they finally parted. "No one will take what's yours or make you feel less than the remarkable woman you are." Rose smiled up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible her body could contain such happiness. "My wages and my heart are both safe with you," she said. "They always have been." They remained at the overlook until the sun began to set, talking of plans for their future, a June wedding once Mrs. Holloway returned from Denver, a honeymoon trip to San Francisco, children to fill the ranch with laughter in years to come. Simple dreams, perhaps, but precious beyond measure to two people who had learned early that happiness must be protected and cherished. As they rode back to the ranch house in the gathering twilight, Rose felt the weight of Ethan's mother's ring on her finger, a tangible symbol of promises kept and a future secured. Victor had taken her wages once, but in doing so, he had inadvertently set her on the path to finding something far more valuable. A love that would never take, only give, never diminish, only strengthen, never harm, only heal. Under the vast Colorado sky, with Diamondback Ranch spread before them and Ethan Logan riding beside her, Rose finally understood the truth her mother had often spoken. Sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations. Her journey had been difficult indeed, but the destination, this man, this ranch, this life was more beautiful than she had ever dared to dream.